D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hello, Gamer Nation, and welcome to the Dice Ball Podcast, covering everything that you've ever wanted to know about how to run and play in the Genesis role-playing game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host, GM Hurley, and before we get started on tonight's episode, I'd like to introduce you to the folks who have made time from sailing the seven seas to record this episode. My co-hosts and friends, GM Huz, GM Flano, and GM Caitlin. How are we all this evening?
Arr. I'm Willie. Doing great.
Right, I'm obviously referring to this wonderful game that you people have now found, which is called
Sea of Thieves.
Sea of Thieves.
Yes.
We may or may not have been playing it for hours on end.
The weekend has consisted of Sea of Thieves.
Yes.
And
Lots of seas and lots of thieves.
Plenty of booty
Right.
too.
Yes, well,
I didn't think it was that. It's been a great weekend, or no? I plundered so much booty this weekend.
all right. So, yes, I think
Digging it up everywhere.
that's kind of set the tone for the episode, maybe. Not
So
sure.
much sand.
Too much sand. Sand gets everywhere. Anyway, ask Anakin. All right.
Oh,
All right. So let's talk about what we've been
what a
up to.
turn. Sorry. I just need to have a bit of an emotional spell for that.
So let's just talk about what sort of gaming we've been up to this week, other than this wonderful game that you guys have been playing.
What else is there?
Well, apparently not a lot. So, GM Huz, what sort of gaming have you been up to?
Well, role playing has been a little bit quiet lately because we have finished up our long-term Dragon Squadron, and life's been a bit busy for us all. I'm in the middle of moving house and stuff like that. But probably by the time this episode's out, I've played a few games, got them under my belt. I think we've got we've done some live plays for Night's Edge. However, I shouldn't leave out the fact that we've started playing Star Wars Legion, which is amazing. I managed to finally get my hands on lots of that, which has been great. So me and GM Hurley have smashed out a couple of super fairly small level starter box entry level games. That was a lot of fun, and hoping to squeeze in a fair few more. I know I've got an 800 point, which is the recommended size. I'm playing in a couple of days, so I'm super keen for that.
So, how bad is your addiction?
It's a given. You know.
What addiction? He hasn't even gotten to the first step of recognizing that he has an addiction.
It's not an addiction until you have an intervention. So until
Fair
then,
enough.
I'm not addicted.
That sounds like an excuse, Michael. Martin.
This is going into the intervention already.
Wait, what are we doing here? Who's the man in the sweater over there?
Yeah.
Wow. What? Anyway.
Psychiatrist.
Right. So, see, it's a visual gag. Anyway, all right. Martin, what have you been up to?
Not so much. Actually, no. I've been playing. Apart from Sea of Thieves, I've been playing Monster.
I'll see of green for you.
Oh god, my
real.
screen, like after playing for like 2 days, just my game is so badly glitched that even uninstalling and reinstalling it just everything is green. Every object in the game glows a bright neon green, and I can't fix it.
How does that work?
If I knew, I would fix it.
This is true.
I've been telling Martin for years he needs a new computer.
I exceed all of the requirements. But apart from that, I've been playing Monster Hunter World. And by the time this episode airs, I will have gotten in some gaming for the Pathfinder game that I am a part of.
Cool.
So that should be pretty fun.
Caitlin.
So something that people need to know about me is when I find something that I really like, I tend to just be completely absorbed by it.
Right. I think they call it obsessive compulsive, maybe?
I think someone's mentioned that to me once or twice before, but I was too busy playing games to actually pay attention to them,
right.
which is probably why they were saying that. Anyway, so
Well, this is a double intervention, just saying. So
So pretty much all I've really been doing is playing Sea of Thieves, like nonstop. But we have been doing some little RPGs, which you might be able to listen to in the very near future as well, which was amazingly fun to play. I was so excited for that, and I can't wait. I can't wait for people to hear that, and to see the characters that we've created for Night's Edge. It was amazing, and yeah, waiting for the next session, basically. So, Ian, what have you been up to? I think you've just come back from a pretty trip that I'm not jealous at all about.
No, exactly. No, so I got the privilege of going to Gamination Con in Plano, Texas, and it was very, very exciting. I got to meet Sterling Hershey, Sam Stewart, and obviously all the guys from the different podcasts that are on the D20 Radio Network. So, yeah, lots and lots of fun to be had. Managed to run 5 sessions of setting roulette, which people would have seen the different setting roulettes that I had up on Facebook.
Lots of different types of ideas coming through on that one. I think, what was your favourite? The My Little Pony one?
No.
But fun was had.
Yes, the 4th session was probably the most interesting. Because I may have had a few drinks under my belt, and I think everybody else did as well. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. But yeah, got to meet a lot of people. Got to play in a few games. Ran a game with Sam Stewart and Keith Capel.
So no pressure on that one.
So no pressure on that one at all. But also got to play in a game with both. Without me GMing, I was actually playing. In a game with both Keith and Sam. It was great, run by Chris Hunt, who is one of the writers for the D20 Radio Network. It was a Weird War game, which actually was kind of cool.
What was weird about it?
Well, we were like a strike crew type, Howling Commandos type thing, and we had to go and attack this base, this German base. And when we got down there, it was actually a deep facility, kind of like an Area 51, but obviously German. And below there were UFOs. It was great. Anyway, I'm sure that Chris will probably write that up at a later stage, but no, much fun was had. So yeah, I will be definitely going again, and hopefully, cross fingers, we all will be. For the next one. We'll see how that all goes.
See if we can,
yeah, it'll be great. But probably the best part of going to Gamination Con was something that happened on the last day. What they do is that you collect XP throughout the show for playing. So for every hour that you play, you get 10 XP. And so they have like this auction at the end of the show, which is absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that they had was that they had the Terranoth book, which was, a bit of a surprise to everybody. Certainly was a surprise to me, because I had to, because I was part of the organisation of the event. That book sat in front of me for the entire time, taunting me somewhat. But anyway, so at the end of it, Holy Guys basically bid on it, and then promptly decided to give it to me in sort of a bit of a ceremony, which was really nice, which is some of the fans of the show. And they just said, you can only get this if you review it. So I'm sure that at a later stage, we will definitely do that, but it's in our hot little hands now, and it is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So
much to look at. We've barely had a chance to go over the top level of it yet.
Exactly right. But no, it's
pictures
really
are amazing. I made sure I checked all of that out because I'm an absolute nerd when it comes to that art, and it is absolutely beautiful. It's a very well put together book. Can't wait to get our own copies. It'd be great.
Indeed. All right.
Now, something I came across just recently, which is pretty exciting and cool, is a browser-based app called RPG Sessions Dice. It doubles as both a dice roller and a character sheet tracker, or a digital character sheet for your Genesis games.
Oh,
yeah, it's pretty cool. I sort of didn't know much about it, and I checked it out, and I was pleasantly surprised by how intuitive it is. You just rolls your dice, you can upload and keep track of your character sheet, or digitally.
Yeah.
And you can share all your details with the people at the table. So the GM can pass you dice and all sorts of cool little things like that.
Yeah.
It's actually a neat little piece of free kit. So that's worth checking out. You'll find that at www.rpgsessions.com. Simple as that.
Cool.
We'll also have a link to that on our resources page as well on the dicefulpodcast.com.
We will.
I love our community. And the sort of stuff that they do is just, I love creative people.
Yeah.
They're just amazing. But anyway.
And speaking of,
Yeah, speaking of.
We have some RPG fantasy weapons that have been produced by Lee Wilton. He's done some fantastic work on his list here. Various weapons that he said does not have verisimilitude with with real world weapons, but is more balanced for gameplay.
Okay.
So give it a look. That'll be available on our resources page as well.
Yep, absolutely.
At the time of recording this, Lee has already put out a new version of it. So he's constantly updating it. So again, by the time you guys actually listen to this recording, there might be a newer, better, improved version out by then. So keep an eye out on that. It's he's very passionate about it, I can tell.
Yeah.
He's put a lot of work into it, which is cool to see.
It looks good.
And Lee's put a bit of a link on the community group for the Dice Bell podcast. So, definitely go and take a look at that. Again, more creative people. Love it. If you've got anything that you'd really like to send us, by all means, just post it up on the Facebook page or send us an email to info@thediceballpodcast.com. But anyway, that's enough gas bagging. How about we get to talking about the show's topic?
Don't we have a segment for that?
yeah, I think it's called something. What's it called?
Oh, core of the show.
Oh, that's it.
What?
And welcome to Core of the Show, the segment where we will take a deep dive into a topic concerning the Genesis role-playing game and, of course, gaming in general. Now, tonight's episode, we're taking a seat in the GM's chair where we'll be discussing how to design awesome episodic adventures for your games in no time at all. In addition to that, we'll be talking about GMing and generally offering some hints, tips, and advice to make getting into the GM chair just that little bit less daunting. Effectively, what we're going to be using is a few things. Now, if you're expecting this to be all about adventure design, you've come to the wrong place. Because what we're going to be doing is not referring too much to the book. But if you really want to get into building an adventure, we suggest you go to page 236 of the Genesis Core Rulebook. And that will actually talk about building the adventure. What we're actually going to be doing tonight is discussing how to get that, if you've never been sitting in the GM's chair before, or even if you have and you just really stuck for how am I going to run an adventure, we're going to offer some tips and tricks to actually get that down pat. So who'd like to start us off? Mike?
Now, what we're discussing tonight is obviously creating, as GM Hulu just said, creating the minutiae of your adventure, the stories that are told within it, the episodes, the action and the adventure and the cliffhangers and the excitement that you have to build every time you take your party out on an adventure, believe it or not. Now, it's important to distinguish the two things together because adventure is your overall setting, is incorporated into that. For example, we'll use Star Wars as a reference. Star Wars, the entire trilogy is your adventure. The world it's set in is in Star Wars. So it's two different things. However, each of those movies is an episodic adventure.
Yep.
And those movies all are broken down into what we call episodic beats. And so there's a little bit of a flow and structure involved in that. And so what GM Huli has done is created a very useful episode beat chart, which you can use to basically sit down and fill in your details for your upcoming adventure. And by using this guide or this chart, it sort of helps you formulate and structure what you need to do. And it can be a little bit difficult and daunting if you have a great idea for a game, but you might not necessarily know how to structure it into an episode. But what the episode beat chart does, again, it lets you refine what's bouncing around inside your head. Because I know me personally, I have a million ideas in my head, but I have a lot of trouble sort of getting them down on paper. But having this formulated chart I can follow really helps me and my brain work it all out. And I'm assuming I'm probably not the only one out there that's like that.
Yeah. Well, even if you're looking at, you're new to the chair, you've never GM'd before, and so you don't even know how to tackle creating an episode or adventure or anything like that, but you want to give it a go. The settings or the episode beat chart that's been created is a really good way of just showing how simple it can be without being too prescriptive in terms of how much detail you need to go into, because let's be honest, as we say, your story is only as good until you start sitting around the table and the players get a hold of it. So the beat chart gives you enough guide in how to structure it with the flow, with not going too prescriptive in the next steps are going to happen. It gives you that overarching idea so you can help guide the story as well. So you don't need to have all these skills and have all the experience as GM. It's a really good starter tool as well.
Yeah, because the big thing with any sort of adventure design, it always goes down to as an adult, we never have enough time. If there's one thing that this system has proven with Star Wars and obviously with Genesis, is that you don't need a lot of prep time in comparison to looking up stats of creatures and things like that. You just need to know the basics, and the stat blocks are designed that way. So it gives you that little bit more time to start looking at your adventure. But where do you start with that adventure? And so I had the same problem, I think, that everybody else has had as far as getting those ideas, as Mike said before. It's getting those ideas onto paper and start formulating those ideas into a cohesive story that will take you from the start, the middle, and to the end.
It's that initial hump which is the hardest to get over. Once you do and start writing it on paper, and especially if you have a guide to follow, you'll find once you get the first part of it down, it'll start just flowing basically, and before you know it, you have a whole episode beat chart filled in, ready to go.
And it's almost kind of player proof if you really want to consider it that, because the players will have the opportunity on how you get to each of those points, but it's not prescriptive enough so that you completely get derailed and don't know where the story is going to go. So it gives you the key points that you need.
That's it. It's overarching rather than being, a zoomed in view of every little thing that could possibly happen.
And that's the key, I think, is not to have that finer point so that you're not painting yourself into a corner effectively.
It's a bit of a trap that GMs can fall into, is over prescribing every single detail of their upcoming adventure. And that creates a lot of work for you. End of the day, if you have your broad idea and broad strokes written down, you find you probably don't need to sit down and write out all these super rigid what ifs and where do the players go and whatnot. You'll find if you're playing for a fairly experienced group especially, once you're at the table and start running with it, using your own guide as a guide, you can sort of steer the story within that whilst allowing lots of player freedom, and that's very important. As soon as you start writing down players must follow plot B to go to plot C, et cetera, that's when you can find yourself in trouble, because when the players just go, well, we're not going to go this way, let's take a hard, sharp turn to the right, and suddenly a GM who's over-prepared suddenly is very underprepared.
Well, it's what we always say. The common saying with us is that no plot survives first contact with the players.
Exactly right. That's right.
And I know one of the things, just before we get into the nitty-gritty of how to create the settings, and just something to keep in the back of your mind if you're a new GM, actually something that Ian told me when I very first started getting into the GM chair and giving it a go, was one pieces of advice that you gave me was, don't put in any locations in any of your stuff. And I think that was really, really cool. And I know you can flesh that out a little bit more because it was your piece of advice, but having that in the back of my mind when using these types of setting sheets and things like that, completely changed the game for me.
So effectively what Caitlin's talking about is that when you design any sort of adventure, make sure that you don't attach it to a place. It's an event. And therefore that the event can get attached then as the players progress through the story to a certain location then. So for example, if you've got in your story that the players are going to meet with a spy who has information to provide them to, it might be a bar, it might be under a waterfall, it might be something else entirely.
Yeah.
It depends on where your players go. And by not tying it to a location and tying it instead to an event, that event can be moved around to wherever you need to go.
And I'm going to lift the curtain here, and this might be spoiling it for GMs a little bit out there, because I'm about to reveal to the players the biggest secret of it all, that the GM really needs to know where an adventure actually is. They can just create up a name or location on the fly. But 90% of the time, players won't realise he's doing that.
Yeah.
And they think the GM's his master who's created this entire environment and location where they haven't at all.
Well,
and players never get to see behind, figuratively speaking, the GM screen when none of that's actually created. And you as a GM, it's amazing because you have the sudden freedom. Because if you plan it or don't plan it, your players won't know either way.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the biggest pieces of advice that I think came out of us playing together. And I'm sure we've probably said it on here before, but make a list of names.
Yeah,
names
absolutely.
for locations and names for people, and just have that behind the screen. When you encounter an NPC that you didn't expect to encounter, throw it out there. The players will never know that it wasn't a pre-planned event.
Yep. List of names, list of location names.
Yep.
I try and do a male, female names, and a couple of names that can be used for either sort of thing, and a list of MacGuffins. A list of MacGuffins is very powerful.
Yeah.
If the players come across a random chest and they crack it open and there's suddenly an ivory
Seahawk.
An ivory seahawk inside of it, the players won't know what that is. You don't know what that is as a GM, but the players think you do.
Yeah.
And the players will grab onto this item and run after it, and that can tell entire stories later on.
Yeah.
So that's one cool thing that can create entire adventures. That's come from one random item on your MacGuffins list. So it's great to have that list in front of you. Spend the 5 minutes it takes to make this list before each session, and you'll never be stuck thinking for a name or a location or anything. You just go, yeah, boom, this.
You bet you could have an entire adventure planned, but the moment you pull out that ivory Seahawk and it's got a name, it's a named piece of art, the players are going to zero in on this item.
Exactly.
I remember I was running a D&D game years ago, and I chucked in a heap of random MacGuffins, and one of them was an ivory hourglass, and one of the players was just asphyxiated with this thing, and he associated the entire campaign to this ivory hourglass. I'm like, yeah, sure, it's all of this important things, and it wasn't. It was just a random thing that made the players super invested immediately into it because it sounded so cool.
And you could totally use that to bring them back to where you want them to go.
Exactly.
The next event.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can use one of the things that Jay Little, who is the guy who designed the entire Genesis as well as Star Wars, as far as the DOS mechanics go. He suggested a while ago on another podcast that you write out a list of, just go A to Z, and you write a word. Doesn't matter what word it is, and you just write that out from A to Z. And then you start choosing those. So if you've got a person's name, you just go that and that, whatever takes your fancy at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another way of doing it too. It's perfectly viable. Yeah.
Lists are powerful.
It takes 5 minutes to do, and it can save you hours of work. So why not just do it?
Exactly. All right, so let's just get into the episode beat system itself. So I'm going to quickly go through, give the rough version. If you actually want to go through and see what the full version's like, you can jump on our on the Facebook website, and it's also available. Well, we'll make sure that it's available. Also on the dicepellpodcast.com, where you can see how each of the different types of beats are actually explained and how you can use them. But effectively, using the beat chart, what you need is a bit of an adventure as a summary as to what you want to do. You need a hook. So that's the reason why that the characters are there in the first place. So what's driving them? You've then got cliffhangers and development. So cliffhangers are going to be things like, an ambush or a dogfight, or some sort of duel or something like that, or an obstacle that the PCs have to get over. Your development is then going to be something which is a little bit more RP focused. And that's going to be things like,
Your investigation?
Yeah, your investigation, your some sort of quest, you've gained some sort of skill, or, it's definitely something which is a lot more role-play heavy than some sort of, rather than, the action sequence. So this is part of your investigation. You've then got what's called a climax. So the climax is sort of the final confrontation with the bad guy, or the big reveal of the investigation that you've been doing, you know, if we want to look at Cthulhu and things like that. And then the last part is going to be a resolution. And the resolution is effectively tying up all of the loose ends of the story. So what happens is in this beat chart system is that you have your hook, which is, as I said, it's where your PCs get started. And then you start with either a development or with a cliffhanger, depending on how you want to go. And then they alternate one after the other. You always finish that sequence with a development, and then you go on to the climax. And then once you've done your climax, you then go to the resolution. Pretty simple, really. So what we're going to do is go through each element of our episode beat system and explain each step in more depth.
We'll sort of just, put together a bit of a small adventure as we go along so that you guys can hear how it's done.
Brainstorm. Sometimes the best way to learn is to hear it being done.
Exactly.
So, we'll just go through, make up a bit of a setting, and then we'll make up our own little adventure using that setting, or within that setting, I should say.
Yeah.
And off we go.
And this beat chart will also be available for download on our various sites so that people can follow along with our process at home. And also because the best way that I like to describe it when I'm trying to show somebody how to do this is actually just find a really good episode of your favorite TV series and see if you can break down where these beats, because this is where the process actually comes from. It's the way that episodes are designed in a TV series. Simple as that.
Well, I would say, in saying that, as a side, I would say a lot of TV series ended a cliffhanger as well.
Well, that's true.
That's
That
the
is
nature of
true.
TV shows. Movies are definitely, most movies are your more final resolution at the end. But TV show has a little bit of a hook that draws you into next episode, or cliffhanger or hooks. They're a little bit different, but more or less they're the same formula.
Yeah, that's right. So again, the episode always starts with that hook.
It does, yes.
And that can be, and one of the examples in a hook is actually to start it as a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
So that's all TV series basically follow this principle. Okay, so before we start this process, we need to have a quick setting to wrap our adventure around.
So we just quickly threw together a quick, random setting in 2 seconds before we started recording this episode. That way it's completely new to everyone, including ourselves, and we're going to build our little episode within our setting. Our setting is our players are playing space bikers located on Tardif 9, which is a junkyard colony world forgotten by the Seven Kingdoms. So immediately it has a very Borderlands sort of feel to it. I'm imagining, these towns and cities sort of built and woven into, miles to the horizon junkyards.
Yeah.
Like the whole economy of this world is based on the trade and salvage of junk, which sounds pretty cool. And I imagine these biker gangs sort of rule it in a way. They terrorize the streets and whatnot, because ultimately there's a billion places these guys can ride off and hide, and no authority can ever catch them. So it's
hidden between, wrecked ships and stuff.
Colossal stuff, like, warships that have just crashed into the planet. They've been left
Maybe
there
some
for
of those guns
centuries.
still work.
Exactly. There's alien craft there. It's a very cool and rich sort of world, I think.
It's like a bit of a darker version than the opening scenes of Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah.
I'd imagine like that, but on a much larger and more rusty scale. So, yeah.
And that setting will be coming at a later stage.
We have too many to do
I
already.
know.
We keep doing this to ourselves.
I know. This is what happens. So we've decided that is our setting. So let's talk about what sort of an adventure. Okay, so what I think might be really cool is we've established that we've got space bikers, but they're gun runners. I think that'd be really cool.
Sounds good.
And they're due for a really big payday. Okay, so the PCs have, they're going to be taking advantage of the fact that they've been given, that this payout is going to happen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think they've been, getting weapons off the old ships, and there's like off-planet bounty hunters or organized crime fleets off-world who are coming to this planet to pick up all these black market weapons.
Yep.
And that's why there's this big payoff coming along.
Yeah.
But there is a double cross.
Dun, dun, dun.
Because that has to be the twist. Because there has to be a twist to every story. So there's going to be a double cross by a rival gang, I'm thinking, which would be kind of cool.
Well,
Maybe.
that gang's been working with them.
Yeah.
It has been, yeah. And now all of a sudden they've decided that they want the bounty of
Maybe
the
maybe
payout
where they
instead.
salvaged it from is on like the border between the two gangs, so they've had to work together to salvage this, and they've had like a treaty.
Right.
I also like the idea that our gang is like renowned, like we are, I want to play this setting already and it's only been a couple of minutes. So the PC's gang is effectively known worldwide for their guns, right? They are the best. And this other borderland gang is not as well known, and they're really trying to vie for that kind of power that comes with that notoriety and that name. So they're just as inclined to work with the PC's gang just as much as the PC's kind of have to tolerate the other ones. So that's where that double cross becomes even more juicy, because they're vying for that power and that to uproot and cause
Overturn.
discontent within the bigger gang, with the more powerful gang. Yeah.
Absolutely.
They've seen their opportunity, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're going for it. They could really use those guns in better ways than selling them.
Well, they could sell them and get all the money and renown for selling them. So
This is true.
Already?
But, and there's a big but.
They don't lie.
lots of booty too.
Referring back to Martin's initial comments. Anyway.
You're not going to be able to edit that out now.
So now we have I think we need another twist to come into this. So the leader of our trusty swoop bike gang, or whatever, space bikers, sorry, trademarked, is that the leader is assassinated. And they don't know why.
That's the twist, though, isn't it?
Well, it could be one of the twists. What
I
happened?
reckon that they all get together to do the trade, but the other gang turns on them, kills the leader as a part of the firefight that goes on fighting over these guns.
Now that's a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
That's
What
a
will our
cliffhanger.
PCs do now?
That's right. So as a result of them losing their leader, they've got this big payoff that they've been double-crossed. So now the idea is that they have to rebuild their crew, rebuild their gang, and then seek revenge on the swoop bike. Well, sorry. I keep referring to the swoop bikes. So they've now got to seek revenge for the death of their leader. And so that's basically our adventure summary.
Well, I'm sold.
Cool.
Yeah, can we play?
I immediately want to adventure.
Get the dice.
Indeed. All right. So our first part of our adventure design is to establish the hook. Okay.
Not to be confused with Peter Pan's hook.
Right.
Peter Pan doesn't have a hook.
No.
No, Captain Hook has
Captain
a hook.
Hook. Okay.
No, Peter Pan. I like to think Peter Pan and Hook were sort of like, frenemies. So when Peter Pan refers to Hook, he goes, "That's my hook."
Oh, okay. Oh. That's really
Right.
twisted.
Moving on.
All right. So we've
You've
got,
had a very interesting childhood, Mike. I think that should be another podcast explaining.
so we've got the hook. So that's going to be, in this case, where we have a list of different types of hooks. So we've got a crisis, a discovery, false accusations, kidnapped, a looming threat, lost memory, a murder, player cliffhanger, player development, or a revelation. So what have we decided we're going to do for the hook? So what's our call to adventure?
The murder.
The murder. Are we going to start with the murder then?
I feel that we start a little bit before that, because I want the players to experience the betrayal.
Sure.
So I reckon that we start with the payday as being the hook. So the idea that the players have got this all set up, and the deal is the hook.
So if we want to get the players invested in it, why don't we actually start it with them actually obtaining the guns? So then when there's a double cross, you just went through this whole
They
thing
really
of getting
feel
the
it.
guns, and now there's a double cross.
cool.
That's doubling your own player investment just
Yeah.
from what Mike said. Well, what Martin said. What Martin said about getting the players invested in it. So that could actually be another good point. And then you've got your few beats
Yeah.
already in your head about what's going to happen next.
All right. So we're going to start off the adventure with the double cross. Is that right?
No. Slightly before that. So they locate the gun. So the first thing that happens is that you read out your little prelude to the players, and it tells them that they've located, or they've heard rumors of, a stash of guns in an old ship that's wrecked on such and such a location, but it's on the border with this this other gang.
Okay, so we.
Oh no! I have an even better idea. The story starts.
This is setting roulette all over again.
It is.
God.
This is what happens. This is what happens. The game and the whole series starts with the ship crashing, and they have to do the mad dash to get to the ship before the other crew, only to find out it's on the border. And so they have to get there, and they, depending on how they roll and what they do, and if they get there first or they get there second.
So the start of this is going to be a discovery.
Yeah.
So we've discovered that there is a shipment of weapons that is on board a vessel which is crash landing on the planet. Right?
I like this more. I want to add to Caitlin's idea.
We just keep building on each other. This is fantastic.
Because they're racing to get to this crashing ship. Because let's say they've known this ship's been in a decaying orbit on the world for a very, very, very long time.
Yes, it's been. That's why they couldn't get to it.
Waiting and waiting away, and finally it's coming down. So they're rushing to it. So before this has happened, all the biker gangs have sort of had this sort of competition almost, and they've assigned all these agreements and bargains of off-world dealers to get these weapons. Except for these our two gangs, the PC gang and this other gang, who sort of share similar territories. They've decided to work together to race to the crashing ship and beat the other gangs. So these two gangs initially start by working together to race to the crashing ship, fighting off all the other opposing gangs.
I like it.
Get there.
Because it secures the two gangs
The bond
working
straight
together.
away.
Yeah.
And that's why the double cross is more brutal, because these two PCs and NPC groups have been working together through this thick and thin, through this big chase or race to this discovery. And so when this betrayal inevitably happens, it's much, much more bitter for the PCs.
Right. You know what? How cool is it to start off a bikey space story with a chase?
Yes.
Right? Sorry, I just want to play now.
All right. So the aim of the exercise with doing any sort of adventure design is to try to make it as simple as possible. Okay. So we need to try to break it down into a couple of sentences just to set the tone.
That's right. Let's do it.
So I think in this scenario, we would have crashing ship with weapons. Thinking about that a little bit more. Do we need to have it just with weapons? Can we just call it the MacGuffin?
Yes, because it could be anything.
Could be anything.
And we talked about before at the very beginning about how you don't prescribe anything to a location. That could be the same for anything. It could be don't prescribe things to a person, don't prescribe things to a particular type of thing. And you might even have in your session 0 that you don't want your gang to be, weapons dealers or anything like that. So perhaps that could just be, MacGuffin XX until you decide what your crew is going to be.
And the sake of this particular story we have here, the MacGuffin could still very well be a secret to the PCs. They're just told to go get what's on that ship, and you as a GM can sort of gauge how they're sort of guessing what's going to be on the ship, and then go, no, it's this instead, and flip it around.
Yeah.
Or, you make it like this really sealed thing, and while all the players are, guessing what it is and doing all of that, you take one of their ideas and
Yes,
Exactly.
I love that meme when they say when you're GMing and you hear all the players going, "Oh my gosh, I hope it's not that," and you're like, "Well, it wasn't, but it is now."
I'm just going to write that
It's not a
down.
container of xenomorphs.
Surprisingly enough, it is. So,
18 xenomorphs.
Exclamation.
seriously, that is something, I think this might be sort of looking again, as Mike said before, behind the curtain a little bit, but you've got to listen to your table. And it goes down to what we talked about when you do the setting roulette. With the setting roulette, you talk about what interests your players. You can do that mid-session. It does take a little bit of practice to get used to, but you can do it in mid-session by listening to the table, and you might have somebody who sort of says, "Oh, I'm sure it's guns. I'm sure it's going to be weapons." And somebody says, "Oh, I bet you it's a nuclear weapon." Or somebody sort of says, "Oh, I bet you it's actually a space marine," or something like that. And then you just go, as a GM, that sounds
All
like
of those.
all of those things.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a space marine armed with a tactical nuclear weapon. That's great.
I'll throw this caveat out there.
Sure.
We're talking about not assigning the MacGuffin to be anything.
Sure.
At the same time, if you're a brand new GM, it can be very helpful to structure it for yourself and assign it as something.
Yeah.
That way you don't get overwhelmed once the game starts.
Also keep an idea of what you might want it to be so that you can already narrate the threads, like have everything sort of...
And there's no reason why it couldn't be the pre-described weapons.
Yeah.
And something else that comes up along if you see an opportunity to add something cool. Like there is indeed a cage full of angry xenomorphs that are roaming.
They
and
are the
crashing.
weapon.
Well, that's it. There's lots of things you could do. But yeah, so there is a fine line between prescribing and not prescribing. So if you're feeling confident to make it fly on the edge of your seat a little bit, then by all means, I think that's the best way of doing it.
Yep.
I think as well, when we're talking about this, we're giving you advice and tips on what you can do. But you always have to go with what actually works for you and what works around with your players around the table. So we might say, do this, but if that doesn't work for you and that's not how you want to play or how you want to GM, go with what works for you and what works for your players. So this is just a guide. I mean, we love this game because the rules allow you to do whatever you want. So this is exactly the same thing. Just a guide so you can do whatever it is that you want and what'll work for you.
Yeah. But as Mike said, though, I think the best thing that you can do is just, if you need to be specific because you don't feel comfortable, by all means, be specific. But for more experienced GMs, leave gaps.
Yeah, like
And just have an idea because you can just have this. This is all you need behind your GM screen.
you can say that it's weapons, but not what weapons they are.
No, exactly.
Because if you do it like that, it could be Lilu sitting in there from Fifth Element, just saying she is a weapon.
But if we then go to the next stage of going, right, it's just MacGuffin. That can be anything that takes your fancy. So we've said that. So the next part of the next sentence to this hook is that two rival gangs, of which the PCs are one of them, is forced to work together to fend off other gangs. So we've basically said that this ship is crashing, and when it crashes, because they've kind of worked out where it's going to crash.
Yeah, because it's been in a decaying orbit.
Yeah, that you've then got to work together with this other gang to fend off so that you're the gang that gets access to these weapons.
Yeah.
By leaving it open-ended or like that, and you're not really saying the next part,
Yeah.
technically speaking, you could probably run an entire adventure just based on that. Because what it is that you're looking at it and going, you know what? What happens if the PCs lose?
Yep.
You know? So that's something
Well, I
else to
think the
consider.
PCs lose. They don't get there before the other gangs. So all of a sudden there's this big shootout in this big area of junkyard region. There's guys scrambling over the top of one another, blasting each other with weapons, and there's space bikes revving up and down the place. A big chaotic battle is going.
Okay, you know what the really special thing here, though, what that means is that we still end up at the next point, no matter which way
do.
that goes, because there's a
Exactly.
gun battle that happens and the leader dies.
That's right.
And the other side of things is just to remember that when we talk about, well, that's what's going to happen when they fail or if they succeed, that's the encounter. And an encounter design and how that's going to work is an episode in itself as
yeah,
well.
absolutely.
So just to keep in mind, we're not going into the detail of that for a reason. And the reason is that that's what we talk about when we talk about encounters.
That's right. Exactly. This is the overview so that you have enough to run a game at a pinch.
Yeah. And sometimes this will give you more than just one session.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Hopefully. Yeah.
And that's a good point. Don't feel like this episode beat chart has to be the one session of the table.
Each-
This could take place over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or more sessions.
Each beat can be a session in itself almost.
Exactly. Yeah. This is more your this is your overarching story for an entire sort of adventure.
Yeah.
Yep.
And which is great. So yeah, don't feel like you need to do this all in one night because then you're shooting yourself in the foot, and no one likes to do that.
No.
Painful.
It is. Yeah.
But I mean, you can do it in one. I know that in the article I mentioned that each beat is worth around about a half hour of role play.
Yeah.
Or a half hour of gameplay.
Depending.
And I will tell you right now. I'll tell
Ian,
you.
have you played with us before?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Again, I was running the other night and using this.
Yep.
We got to hear.
Okay, you're pointing here. This is a podcast. Steve.
We got to the second beat down the cliffhanger.
Right. Yeah.
So yes,
Yeah, exactly.
they should know what I'm talking about.
I guess it depends how roleplay heavy your group is.
This is true.
That's right.
Don't
Exactly.
feel like you need to truncate anything. Because
No.
let players stretch their legs. If,
Yeah.
if your group of players wants to get really role play heavy, let it happen. Because as a GM, when your players are role playing with one another, you just sit back and do nothing.
Hey,
and just enjoy the show.
If you write or plan what you think is going to be 30 minutes of gameplay and it lasts for 3 sessions,
Yep.
hey, you're winning.
Yeah, exactly right. So once we've got all of those, once you've got your sentences in play, just take a look at the left-hand side of the sheet. And for those people who are following on at home, this will be under the hook. And where in our system, it's a discovery. Now, we've kind of gone into the realm of what's like the first part of our sentence where we're talking about a crashing ship with a MacGuffin on board. That realistically is all that you need for the hook. That's got the PCs. Oh, what is this hook? There you go. So that's your hook. But when you start talking about your two rival gangs, which are forced to work together to fend off other gangs, that's sort of an idea. But then we start talking about the actual battle that has gone on between, or that is going to go on between these two rival gangs that are working together, one of which is the PCs, as well as these other gangs. So for our cliffhanger, it may be a battle.
Yep, it could be a battle. Honestly, this could, on our particular one, this could be a couple. It could be a battle or even a chase, depending on how you wanted to structure it.
Yeah.
Why not both?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like, say, for example, they do horribly on to try and get there in time. So that means that the other crews have managed to get there.
Yep.
They've managed to unload the stock and get it on so they have to chase them. Or they get there in time and then they have someone come on board and they have to try and combat. So many different things that still leads you to the same
I
point.
love the idea of a running gun battle from the back of bikes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
this is biker theme, so I think if we're not having some sort of biker based, chase/gun battle, then this is in the setting. We're not doing the setting justice.
Yeah.
So I think I think we're all picturing, these bike jockeys essentially weaving their vehicles in and out of this, all these crash ships and debris.
Jumps
whilst
off the
shooting
back
each
of
other.
ships.
Yeah.
I totally have a scene of them on their way
Yep.
and they are trying to get there in time and then they see that there's another rival
Yes.
gang that's not who they're partnered with coming in as well, and there's just a little bit of a moment where they have to try and shoot them out.
And this,
Yeah, that's it.
in our one, this is the chance for the GM, because this is your opening conflict.
Yeah.
So this you don't want this to be a big grand final conflict where your players are being overwhelmed or anything
No.
like that. You want to make them feel like they have the power. So you want your enemies in this scene being fairly minions.
Yeah.
They exist.
They're
So you want
throwaway.
them throwaway enemies. You want the players to feel like they're in control, and ultimately. Which is good for you and you as a GM in a way, because it moves the story to where you want it to move to. So, again, using the example we've got in front of us, we're riding our bikes through the junkyard, and there's just dozens of bikes chasing after our PCs, and our PCs are just dispatching them and slamming them into walls, blasting them with sawn-off shotguns, eviscerating them with giant chainsaws, all sorts of brutal carnage. And
Chains.
Exactly. Give throwing chains into exhausts
Yeah.
of their space bikes and just churning people up alive. That's amazing. I'm digging the aesthetics of that immediately.
Flipping story points so that the opposing rival gang has set up a chain across the path that they're flying
Decapitation.
through.
Yep.
And the PCs have to avoid that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's the second sentence?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool.
Interesting. Yes.
See?
Yes.
You don't need a lot.
So really, this could be a combination of a chase, a battle, and using our own little system, a skill challenge. Roll
Exactly.
together.
I love skill challenges.
Yeah.
They are cool. That's another episode altogether.
It is, and it needs to be.
But
But yes. And then that's
yeah.
our cliffhanger.
So that's kind of our cliffhanger for the story. So we've now got this idea of what the adventure is going to be about. And the other thing to remember is that stuff can actually morph as you're going to go, I don't like that idea, I can change it. Nothing needs to be concrete in this process. So we know our story. We know what's hooked our players in, and it's only taken a sentence to work that out.
Yeah.
We now know that another sentence for the cliffhanger is two rival gangs forced to work together, and they're going to have to battle these other ones. So you've got your battle happening. So once that gets resolved, whether that be that the PCs win or the PCs fail, we now have a development. So what's our development going to be? So development tends to be a lot more about role play, about investigation.
Well, two things can happen as a result of that previous session.
Yep.
The thing is that they either get there in time or they don't.
Correct.
So the next session, the next part is investigation or cooperation with this other gang. So they need to either set up the meat to sell the goods,
Yep.
or they need to locate where the other gang has taken it. How do we roll that into one?
How will you roll that into one sentence?
Well, I think you might be not necessarily making it more complex than it needs to be.
Yeah, possibly.
Because I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the cliffhanger, because we've gone through the hook. The hook takes us, gives us the drive to get on our bikes and go to what needs to be gone to. The cliffhanger is the fight in the chase to the MacGuffin that's crashing out of the sky, and the development's the ultimate end result of everything that's happened here. And I think what we have planned was a betrayal. Because
there was a double cross.
Exactly. The two gangs who have worked together to get to this MacGuffin that's crash landed, they work together. They do their skill challenge, investigation, or whichever to draw the weapons out, and then
I think you're right. I'm getting too into the nitty gritty. Yeah. We keep this very high
you
level.
need broad strokes.
Because either way, they succeed and they get there in time, and then they're double crossed by the gang anyway. Or they fail and they don't get there in time and they're double crossed anyway, with the captain being, or the leader, or the leader of the gang is killed. So either way, depending on what happens there, that is your main cliffhanger as well, is that betrayal. Yep. So how that actually plays out, you could have the betrayal doesn't happen straight away, or the betrayal does happen straight away, or however, depending on how the roles of that story plays out, you have that freedom, because you know it's going to happen at some point, but how it's going to happen hasn't been determined. The players are going to let you fill in those blanks.
Yeah, no matter what occurs between the hook and the development, the ultimate development is there's a betrayal. The leader of your gang is killed by the other gang. That's your development.
Which doesn't even really matter if they get the guns or not.
Yeah.
Because they might decide, depending on how the players have gone, like your players might be so invested in those weapons that it's, okay, the leader's gone. Well, we need to divide up. We need to promote whoever is the vice leader and go after those weapons, because that's what he would have wanted. And it becomes that whole, he wanted those guns, so we have to therefore go after that. Or your players might go, actually, the weapons are not as important because we've just lost our leader. He was so important to us, or she was so important to us. We have to go after whoever and find out whatever happened there. So, and that can all feed into each other. You don't have to have two separate stories depending on how they go. They marry up nicely with each other, but you're playing to whatever is motivating the players around the table. Is it the weapons, or is it the fact that they have to provide vengeance on whoever killed them? And it can be one and the same.
And it keeps to our beats. So our next beat is the betrayal. That's our development.
Exactly. So that'll be whether it be
like the investigation type of
the investigation sort of thing, and
finding out either who killed them or who took the weapons, or probably that they're probably very coinciding.
Maybe the same thing.
Well, I can imagine this development in our particular story playing out as a big role playing scene. Because the gangs they've gone inside, they've retrieved the weapons, they've got it all laid out in front of them, and all of a sudden the gang leader, your gang, the PC's gang leader, has a revolver put to the back of his head and he's shot. And
right in front of you.
Exactly. And for whatever reason, the PC players, that cliche, are knocked out and they wake up for whatever reason and they're left behind. Everyone else has been shot and murdered, and the gang which you were working with have taken off with the gear.
Yeah. Or instead of getting knocked out, you discover after that gunshot, that they were actually working with another gang.
Or as a sniper sitting up in the hill somewhere.
Yeah, or however it plays out.
I totally have this view that whoever has actually killed the leader is dressed in a garb that they don't know. They don't recognize the helmet, whatever. There's a pattern on the helmet. So no, they don't recognize it as the other crew or the other gang. But they don't know. They have to figure it out. And that's all part of that that puzzle. They have to try and figure out like who is that person, and then it leads back to however your story is going to play out.
So effectively,
there's another MacGuffin right there.
So effectively, the development in this story is the leader is assassinated, but the murderer of that leader is unknown.
Yes.
Well, that sort of doesn't make it a betrayal anymore.
No, that's true.
However, there's no reason your development couldn't be quite a large segment of your game, because yes, again, if the leader is killed, initially the players don't know who that guy is, so they go on to a development and
they discover
that
it was a betrayal.
that was a betrayal.
Yeah, absolutely.
That guy was
So yeah.
So what's our what's our one or two sentences
So
there?
the one or two sentences, I think, is that with or without the weapons, the rival gangs return to their base of operations. During the meeting of what to do with the weapons or how to retrieve the weapons, depending on the circumstances, the leader is killed.
Yep.
PCs must investigate what happened.
ultimately they discover it's a betrayal.
It's a betrayal. And so there you go. And so then we then go on to our next part, which our next part of the beat, which is another cliffhanger. So this might be a chase scene. It might, if we didn't do a chase scene before, because we don't want to use the same tropes over and over again.
No.
It might be a foot chase.
Well, I think
it might be just a gun battle.
Yeah. Well, I think in our one, a confrontation's perfect because we discovered that the PCs discover that their leader was killed by the allied gang. Guess whose door they're going to be knocking in?
The leader of the other gang.
Yep, other gang's
I'm the
stronghold.
one that knocks.
That's it. That's exactly it. So I think a confrontation is perfect for our one,
Yep, absolutely.
for our next cliffhanger.
Now, what are we going to do for that? Because we don't want this story to suddenly finish, although we could, depending on the circumstances, and this could be our cliffhanger, because there's, we've had a development, we've had a cliffhanger, and now we can just do a climax and then the resolution.
Well,
but if we want to make the adventure a little bit longer,
if we want to drag it out, okay, they know that it's a betrayal, but because they've had their leader killed, some of their people have died in the process or have left because they were only loyal to that leader and joined other gangs, perhaps even our rival gang that was supposed to be working with us has now got a sudden influx of members from our own gang. And it's just the players left. So they're not in a position to fight this gang, so they've got to do the recruitment.
because I've just had a thought, as part of that whole investigating who's done the murder, to throw in our wonderful twist,
Yep.
perhaps it's actually one of the former members that you just mentioned.
Makes it even more.
To try to prove his loyalty to the new boss.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like it.
So,
And prior to doing the deed, he actually obtained the loyalty from a lot of the other crew, the other members of the gang.
yeah.
That feeds into the even more of a betrayal because you don't go across, you don't betray where your leathers lie, basically.
Yep.
So having that is should be even more emotion evoking in your players.
The other thing as well, if you want to go complete 180 as far as the twist goes, because we talk about we still have betrayal as part of the process, perhaps we confront the other gang, and the gang says we don't have anything to do with it, and there's some sort of whether it be a social encounter or something like that between the two. And then in actual fact, we found out that it's the number 2 who wanted to move up in the world. So he's arranged already that he's going to be.
So it's a social conflict.
It's a social conflict.
So this is our second cliffhanger, isn't it?
This is our second cliffhanger,
So it's a social confrontation.
which I think is really cool.
That
Absolutely.
is.
So now we've got that. We've now established that there's been this betrayal. Obviously, as a GM, you're going to have to work out what that betrayal might be.
Yep.
You might decide to write it down on the episode guide of what you're going to do, or you might just leave it up to how it transpires during the adventure. Because if there's one thing, having run a number of adventures using this chart now, I would suggest to anyone that the further you go through the beats, the less likelihood you're actually going to get to those beats in its current form as written. Because so many things are going to happen during the adventure, it's going to compound.
Well, you can just use what we've just spoken about just in creating this sheet.
Yeah.
We're all effectively players in this world that we're creating and telling the story as we're doing this example. And from starting from the summary to each section, we have developed that story and turned it on its head like 3 times, and each time that we've done that and we've built on it because we're players as much as we are GMs as well. So already you could have pre-prepared all this, and just so that everyone knows, we're just doing this completely on the fly for this recording, but you could have had written down what you thought this example was going to be, and we would still change it because we're players and that's just how it is. And we have we love building on the ideas of others.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's never going to turn out that way, but making it as generic as possible is a good guide.
Leaving it high level, like we discussed before, means that because the weapons aren't as important as we initially thought about, it means that we can't, whether you get it or not, the beat still happens.
Yeah, because the weapons are basically the background initially.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could go into actual story design and a whole or probably an entire podcast designed about how to write a story.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can do things like if we go down to what's the term? Schrodinger's gun? No, that's not the one. It's Chekhov's gun.
Chekhov's gun. Yeah.
So effectively, Schrodinger's gun.
Is it loaded or isn't it?
Yes. That should be a T-shirt. Schrodinger's gun. Is it loaded or not?
AKA Russian roulette.
That's the best mix-up of analogies ever. It's the best. It works so well.
So if you've got Chekhov's gun, for the listeners, if you've never heard of what Chekhov's gun is, effectively anything that you show at the start.
Has anyone seen my gun?
It could be in the box. It may be not in the box. So if you've got a weapon or something, a MacGuffin that you've seen at the start of the episode or the start of the TV series, it has to be used by the last scene. Okay? You see it all the time in TV series that you'll see there might be a key that gets mentioned and it's just casually mentioned, or there might be a gun on the wall that some character just refers to very briefly. If it's referred to, it should be used by the end.
Yeah.
So what we've effectively set ourselves up for here is that the guns or the MacGuffin should be used sometime towards the end.
Yeah. Well, the rival gang's still trying to move them on.
That is true.
So,
And again, as we said, allow your players to determine where their passion for that session lies. Because it might be that whilst, there's this big betrayal of the leaders have been, the weapons themselves, if you've got players that have created these nuclear weapons or these, these huge weapon kind of thing, they might need that in order to exact the revenge that they want to do, or they might need those weapons in order to assert their authority, like all those types of things. So it doesn't have to necessarily be one or the other. It can feed in, but allow your players to determine where they want to focus their energy on and build your narrative around that so that they're just as invested whilst you're also feeding in some of these other things. So the betrayal of the leader can still be a key part of it, but it doesn't have to be the narrative. The narrative can be finding the weapons to, to live on what the leader would have wanted to have happened.
yeah.
Cool. So we've got our cliffhanger, which is effectively our confrontation.
Our second cliffhanger, that is.
Our second cliffhanger.
one.
Now, we can't go from cliffhanger to climax, so we need to have a development. Okay, so what is going to be the development part of the story for this next one?
Well, we found out that the 2IC of the PC's gang was the man behind the betrayal.
Yeah.
He set everything up and got the wheels turning to make sure the leader was killed so he can basically, bit of a power play.
Yeah.
Well, the players now know who is responsible and where they need to focus the next part of their story.
I'm looking here at a little bit at our beat summary, and under developments, I'm looking at Revelation.
So
I'm looking at Back from the Dead, and I think we need to turn this into a zombie game.
All right, okay. Hear me out. The actual guy's
And the leader wasn't dead all along. Sorry.
I would have got away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids.
as long as it's not all the dream sequence, then that would just be really annoying.
Oh, yes. I agree with you entirely.
I do not like that trope.
No,
not even a little bit.
I instantly hate anything that is, as soon as that comes out, like Click. And if anyone hasn't seen Click, too bad. Don't watch it. It's a terrible film.
Spoilers.
And just to reconfirm, that is underneath the development option. So if you are looking at the sheet, you will see that as an option on the side there. I didn't just pull that out of nowhere.
So there's a number of options that you could use there. Things like mistaken identity could be another one. You know, that the PCs are focused on the fact that these rival gangs, that they're the ones that are responsible for the death. But the development is that they find out that an actual fact, as I mentioned before, that the second in command of the team or the gang that the PCs are a member of, that they're the ones. He's the guy, or she's the girl, that are responsible for the assassination. However we decide to do it, that's the development. And then we've got the climax. So the climax is obviously going to be the end.
Can I just say,
Sure.
I have this huge vision of a Mad Max style confrontation final fight between the PCs, like the PCs and the top ones from the other gang, and like, you know, winner wins all, like whoever. And it's a fight to the death, basically.
Well,
and there's got all of them around, and it's the junkyard, and they have all of the ships and all of the debris around them, and they've got fires lighting up the little holes where everyone's sitting and watching this big fight.
Just to roll it back just a little. So we had this development. We didn't design it.
Sure.
But I've got something.
Sure.
There's a little box here that says strange bedfellows. So what I think has happened is that there's this guy that's betrayed us.
Right.
By working with the rival gang in order to secure the guns and his position, and he's taken all of his men with him into this rival gang. He's betrayed the leaders of that gang
As well.
because he knows they'll never trust him.
Right.
So he's killed. So he's either bumped them off or removed them from power and taken over that gang.
He's a double agent.
And so this development is us now working with those that and the enemy of our enemy is our friend. So the people that rival gang, we're now working with them again in order to get to this point where we have the big battle with this guy and his two ICs. And
This just turned from like a bikey story into like a full-on spy, double agent, you know, type
absolutely.
of. Is it a triple agent if you're doing the back and forth?
Almost a triple agent, but I mean, you could throw into the mix that the original owners of the MacGuffin turn in, and so that's your ultimate twist. So this guy's been playing both parties off each other.
that's part of the climax.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Mike.
No. This dude's ultimate end goal is he's going to sell these weapons to
He
off-world
wants to get
traders.
off this planet.
He does. So he sells these weapons to off-world traders, offers them a bit of a discount if they come in with their gunships and whatnot and blow up the rest of the gangs, including the ones he's just joined with, so that he can join their ranks.
I hate this guy.
He's a
He's
jerk.
It's Dark Lando all over again.
No, Dark Lando wouldn't get his
We
hands
like
up, dude.
Dark Lando.
Dark Lando's the one that comes in with all the guns and just takes the guns
much.
and leaves.
I will take these now, thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we have this ultimate confrontation, whether it be with the Imperial Space Marines that have rocked up, or to reclaim their MacGuffin, or if it's him trying to, you know, work with a mercenary unit to, you know, get off world or whatever. We've effectively got our climax to the story.
And just putting it out there, now that you've mentioned that, I can't help but feel that this is in our Night's Edge setting, and we have a floating junkyard city where this is taking place.
Let's not start down that road.
I'm sorry, but it's just happened now.
No,
Well,
it is.
there's one thing.
Werewolves on bikes, come on now.
Oh, stop it.
my
cool is
shade,
that?
my shade touched. Teleporting from bike to bike.
Bikes are all made out of bone. Of course.
Yes.
No, they're not bikes. You know what they are.
What?
They're griffins.
Stupid griffins.
We can't get it started. Stupid griffin.
Stop pulling that griffin's tail, bro. He doesn't like it, eh?
For those that don't get the reference, listen to the end of episode 7, I think it was.
All the way to the end.
All the way to the very end.
Well, there's one thing that I think we could throw into this mix.
Yeah.
So let's not forget that the whole point of this MacGuffin from the start was to sell these to off-world traders, because this is how this world of Tardif 9 stays around. It scavenges off these ships and sells them on to probably most of the time fairly scummy individuals like pirates and bounty hunters and bandits, etc., etc., etc. So bigger off-world influences that make our little crews of biker gangs look fairly amateurish in comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when these off-world presences come to the world, they are the ultimate big bad guys. Like no one can oppose them. So it's only a matter of time until this big bad off-world presence arrives to the planet, and they're going to take these weapons no matter what. They don't care what inner gang squabbling's going on.
They don't care who's
So
selling
if
them.
the players, PCs, don't resolve this issue in time, they're going to lose their MacGuffin and everything they've cared for. So you can use that as a GM to, again, add a ticking clock and really give an ominous presence to the entire campaign or
Did we
entire
just-
adventure.
I think we just told the story of Fifth Element.
What? Good grief. I'll tell you what we have done.
Think about it.
We have told.
Spaceship crashes.
Yeah.
They have to find this weapon. Lilo
Yep.
is there. They have to race against time to get to the place. They have to resolve it. Sorry.
Wow.
I just love that movie. I see it in everywhere I go.
Obviously. But no, what we have actually told is the first adventure of a Necromunda setting.
Oh, man.
Look at that.
Yeah, like, I don't know, Mike. Who's
I
gonna...
don't like the Warhammers.
Oh.
Really?
Must be a different Mike I was thinking of.
No,
Mike,
who
yeah.
are you? And what have you done with
It's like,
Tumble?
yeah. We need our real host back. This stand-in Mike just simply will not do.
I said I didn't like the Warhammers.
Right.
I love the Warhammers.
That's better.
There we go.
All right, so our climax is going to be the main big battle with the big bad, whether it be the big bad and his rival gang, or the big bad and the mercenaries, or the big bag and the big bag.
But that's our one-liner there for our beat there is the final confrontation with the big bad guy.
Yep.
Who that big bad guy is going to depend on our other beats.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And how the
absolutely.
players have gone with that.
Exactly. And how the dice rolls have gone, because I can just imagine a few despairs in there, a few extra people in that ring.
Yeah.
That's right.
And at this point, you're probably thinking, geez, it's gotten very vague towards the end of the episodic beats. That's because it has gone very vague, because as I think GM Caitlin said it earlier, that as the story progresses, and I think GM Huli said it too.
I think we've all said it.
We've all probably said
Yeah.
it. We all say a lot of things, so I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to keep track.
We don't remember what we have said.
That's it.
Clearly.
But by the time you get to this point when you're actually playing at the table, this is probably going to be after several sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're going to know exactly what's what. And this beats chart, you're probably not even going to look at it that much.
You can probably expand upon it as well. Leave room.
Exactly.
You're going to fill it in.
Exactly. So don't feel like you need to have every single step detailed fully.
Just so long as you get the overview, the high level beat down
Yep.
to start, you can fill in the details like we've sort of done here
Exactly.
as you go along.
And once you start playing, everything will just fall into place perfectly. You're going to know exactly where to take the story and where the players are wanting to take the story.
Exactly.
Because if the players invested, they're not going to go, well, let's drop this investigation and find out why we're betrayed and go buy grapefruits at the markets. they're not going to do that because they're invested in the story.
You want to bet.
Yeah.
No, if
Depends on how
you've done
good
it,
grapefruit is.
well, if you've done it right, it should be.
Exactly. They're not going to go. No, they're not going to go off track and seek a new adventure when they've got this very established story they can tell
Exactly.
that's leading them into an interesting place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if they have that ticking clock as well.
Yeah.
So as we go down to breaking down each one of these episode beats, you should always be referring back to your summary as the things that you need to break down into its various elements. Now, what you have to do is you have to look at each of the points or each of the sentences in your summary and understand that this is what each story beat is going to be about. So you need to elementize that. So we've got one last beat to go, though.
We do.
The resolution.
And that's going to be the resolution. That's right. So we need to look at what's going to happen afterwards. And I tell you what, I never ever do the resolution because it's just too dependent on despairs and triumphs when it comes to this setting. But
And the story being told before that too. Like,
exactly.
There's so many variables in how the story will end.
The idea is that you're at this point tying up everything that's gone before. If you don't know what's gone before, what are you tying up?
That's right.
Yeah.
So in this sort of circumstance, how would we look at what are some of the ideas, or how do we want this story to end?
Well, I would. The one line for me would be the players reign triumphant.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Yep.
I would still write down a resolution that I would predict happening. And if that happens, so be it. If it doesn't, not the end of the world.
You at least get an idea of where you want the story to go.
Exactly. So don't leave it out and go, well, I'll worry about that in the end. Because if you fill it out at the start, the resolution, let things happen and play it as it goes. But still do it anyway for the practice of it and to sort of give yourself a bit of a guide where you're going.
Yeah. You don't have to keep to this. It is just to give you, because if you don't fill this out and you don't have something in mind, whether it's this piece of paper or not, if you don't have something in mind, you will get lost.
Yep.
I think it's as good as well to think that the resolution doesn't necessarily have to be, they trail off into the sunset happily ever after.
No.
The resolution can be that they fail. Or the resolution can be that they succeed, but only marginally. Or it can be that they trail off into the sunset. But the other side of it is that it could be the decision point in which the players decide if that is going to be the resolution for them and how they're going to resolve it themselves by giving them either a moral quandary or something like that. So say, for example, your resolution is that in part of one of the options here is that the villain surrenders. So they have to decide, if the villain surrenders, will they kill them or will they let them go?
Yeah.
And that could just be some of your ideas for the resolution, is that how are you going to let the players decide how that's going to end?
Heck, you could preordain that the villain is going to surrender.
Yeah.
And give this villain if you make him human enough or plausible enough, so he does surrender, the PCs might feel bad for actually killing him.
Yeah.
So conflicted.
Or they might feel even better about doing it depending on how you've made this character be.
Final bullet in the head is the most satisfying thing they've done. And it's like, good. And it also could be the most corrupt thing they've done.
I love the box here that says ending cliffhanger.
Yep.
You shoot him in the head, mistaken identity.
You shoot him in the head, but he's back from the dead.
You are destined to try to get this whole zombie thing.
I love my necromorphs. I can't help it. I love my dark stories.
See, I'd just like to touch base very quickly in relation to talking about how to set up your NPCs. And this is another entire episode again about how to design really cool NPCs.
Yeah.
But one of the things, if you want to go down that whole moral quandary thing, you have to set up your NPCs to be either really hated or really liked. And one of the tropes that I've used in the past is to basically make it that he's a family man. And his motivation, and this is where you look at your NPC motivations.
Yeah, you need to know who he is.
Who he is, that's right. And if during that investigation that was going on, trying to track him down or whatever else, that maybe they find out that the reason why that he's doing this in the first place is because he has a child who is dying of some sort of horrible disease.
And this is when you find out that the players are really the villains because they kidnap that child and hold him hostage.
Exactly right. So there's all sorts of things that this can go in either direction, but there's a whole list of options there as far as the resolution.
And I will say as well, we talked about the resolution being the ending of the story as well, but that could just be the ending of that story arc.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
your resolution could be how that's going to link into the next adventure. So I know from Dragon Squadron. Dragon Squadron has had so many different story arcs and episodes to this larger campaign that your resolution doesn't have to be fully detailed that, characters walk off into the sunset and, roll credits. It could be the characters do this, which leads into your next part of your adventure summary and your hook for the next episode.
Yeah.
And another thing worth pointing out too, that again, speaking of what Caitlin just said, and episodes in a larger campaign, we're assuming that the players in our example episode we've written here, we're assuming that they're just starting this campaign off afresh. What happens if this has been an ongoing campaign for several months, and this NPC which betrays them has been a loyal friend up until this point? So with that betrayal is even more bitter and is even more sour. And when he does ultimately surrender, because you've preordained that he will no matter what, the PCs are left with this ultimate choice of killing off this NPC who has helped them thick and thin in the past. And for whatever reason, he has decided to do this betrayal and leave them behind. who knows what his motivation
But you
is.
justify those reasons.
You do justify his reasons.
No,
but
absolutely.
Making that NPC, maybe giving that attachment to NPC, giving the PCs the attachment to that NPC well before this game even this particular story starts can make that portrayal so much more stronger.
Yeah.
And how cool would it be if that NPC was an NPC that was created by the PCs?
Session 0.
Session 0.
And I would highly recommend to listen to the first Session 0 of the Night's Edge, which will be out by the time that this is released, where we actually do exactly that. And already I'm thinking of a couple of those that
Don't
could
steal our
potentially...
ideas. Don't steal our
But that would be something that's really cool. And that is something that could be done at the beginning of a fresh campaign, or it could be something that was done in another one. I mean, everyone loves having those recurring NPCs that are just created on the fly that all of a sudden now have flesh and blood and meat to them that the PCs have created.
Or even if you're not starting a new campaign and you're playing in a group that's been playing for several months, sit down and have each PC make up an NPC and suddenly inject them into the story. Because chances are the PCs will be working within a large organisation or something like that, or have close ties to other groups. There's no reason you just couldn't pull an NPC from one of those pre-existing groups and slap it into your ongoing campaign.
Yeah.
Don't have to do anything with them. But hey, when you want that NPC to betray or die or be held hostage or whatever, he becomes the ultimate source of hatred or the ultimate MacGuffin.
Yeah. I think basically what we're saying here as well in looking at this is, as a GM, don't feel that you have to do all of the work. Allow your players to do most of the work for you, and you just give them the skeleton.
Yep.
So being a GM doesn't have to be this huge, big, monstrous task where you think of all the possibilities that could possibly happen and you have to create it and do it all for them. No. You create the shell and you allow the players to do all that hard work and create a story that's meaningful for them, and you get to go along on the ride just as much as the players do.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, sharing with the players and creating the world with the players and etc. There's no reason why you can't sit down with your players and create a whole episode beat chart with your players. Sure, the players may be getting insights to the upcoming campaign, but they're not going to know the nuances of it. And sure, and good players won't act with out of character knowledge. So there's no reason why you couldn't discuss an episode beat chart with your players and sit through and actually play through that. Because let's face it, we rewatch movies 1,000 times. I think Caitlin's seen Fifth Element once or twice.
What's that? What was that movie?
Sixth Element.
Sixth Element, I think it
That's
is. Yeah.
Wow.
It's got The Rock in it, doesn't it?
A couple, actually.
No, but seriously, like you could play through a pre-written episode beat chart you've done for your players. Because I guarantee the players, again, will have so much more investment because they know how rich the story is going to be.
Yep.
And how exciting it's going to be once they're in the field and are playing the nuances of it, the nitty-gritty of it. Because I know all of us sitting here, if any one of us decided to run this game, this space biker game we're talking about here in front of you, all of us would play it no matter what, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen.
In following on from that, anyone, no matter what their skill level, would be able to GM that kind of campaign and would be able to GM that session because they know what's going to be happening next. But I have an idea that I think would be really fun.
Look out.
How we did the setting roulette.
Yep.
Imagine doing a roulette style using the sheet, and you have your hook hat, you have your cliffhanger hat, you have your development hat, and you have your climax hat, and you just pick out the random elements of it, and you create a story using that.
Everyone writes
That
a
would be
sentence.
Yeah.
That makes it work
bizarre.
into whatever's picked.
Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
That'd be kind of cool.
We should probably try and do that at some
We should
point.
do that.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
So I've just had a huge brain explosion moment going. I want to do that tonight.
There's brain everywhere. That's horrible.
So one of the things that I would like to
Zombies.
recommend to all of our listeners when it comes to these beat charts is that there is nothing wrong if you're on a roll, if you're anything like me, when it comes to a story, you start a story and you go, yeah, this is really cool. And you go, right, I know what the next story is going to be. Or during that process, something else comes to your mind as to what else can be part of another story. Have a whole heap of these beat charts because it's only 2 pages.
Yep.
Print it out, double-sided, and just go to town.
Yeah.
And just start writing out those ideas. And you'll find very quickly that you will have almost an entire campaign worth of stories that are on the page. And you don't need to be a massively successful writer or anything like that to do that. It's just a matter of going through and just brain jumping about stories, about what you want to play.
for me, some of the things that I would look at using this sheet for as well is when looking at your session 0, when you have all the players around the table and they're talking about the type of story they want to tell, the types of boundaries and where they kind of see themselves as players as well as characters, is actually having a sheet like this for each of your characters and their backstory.
Yeah.
Because that could be a really good way, even if it's not completely full, but as they're talking about their characters and as people are talking about their histories, because part of what we talk about in that episode 0 or the session 0 is to go, well, how do you guys know each other? What's your background? Why are you connected? Why are you invested in this type of story that you want to tell? And just as they're talking, because players can just sit and chat and you have this sheet and you might have someone who's gone, oh, I had this character in my past and they've left me hurt. Okay, well, there's your cliffhanger there in one point. So just make a little note of it. And it'll actually make the world of difference is that if when you're a GM and that I've had this moment in your sessions with Dragon Squadron where you've just mentioned a character in passing in a backstory or something like that. And all of a sudden that character comes back and it's this huge earth shattering moment for you as a player. And it's those little things that can make a difference between a session for a campaign that someone just plays casually to a campaign that someone talks about for years on end.
Yep. I would agree.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, Mike?
I think we pretty much covered everything we need to cover. I think there's probably some room for expanding upon this in terms of how to create your encounters and stuff like that. Because again, that's an entire another ball game.
Another topic, yeah.
It really is. However, the beauty about Genesis, you don't need to flesh out every encounter to a T. You don't need to know how many of what group of minions is there, etc. Seriously, if you follow this beat chart, you could probably run a session after 15 minutes writing it.
Yep.
If you got a fairly good level of experience with running with a narrative dice, you could just do this in minutes. Obviously, if you're more of a more newer GM, you may have trouble setting it all up and whatnot. I think we will a future episode of us discussing how to set up encounters efficiently and smoothly for yourself, because it seems very daunting to set up an encounter and all the bits and pieces that fill in this episode beat chart. But really, it isn't. It's quite straightforward. It's just a matter of knowing the best ways of doing it. And I think we're going to discuss that in the future sometime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
And keep in mind that what we've done here tonight, we've probably fleshed it out a little bit further than what you need to do to fill out the beats here on this sheet.
We got carried away, but that's okay.
That's what
That's good.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
It's an example of we came into this not knowing anything about the story or the setting. In essentially a matter of no time, we've created this cool story arc.
Yeah.
And we've fleshed it out to the point where it's like, what's going on? It's so much stuff is happening here. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And there's depth to it. That's the other thing. I think for me, in looking at this and being a relatively new GM, I'm much more comfortable being a player, so on the other side of the screen. But in having a look at this and using these tools and actually having used these tools as a new GM, it does make it so much easier to not have so much pressure on yourself and allowing your players to have that responsibility just as much as you. And you're just guiding the world in the sandbox basically that your players are in. So it doesn't need to be this huge daunting thing of I can't do that. You definitely can.
Absolutely.
And with the right group of players around and supporting you and everyone contributing to it, it becomes just as much as everyone's shared story around the table as much as it is you trying to tell that story as a GM. So don't feel so much pressure in doing it. It's not as scary as you probably feel it is. Just give it a go. And allow your players to do some of that more harder work for you.
The heavy lifting.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's this big long going. I think there's been this long going thing of where the GM or the role of GMing, people sort of see it as this big daunting task where everything the GM does is super secret squirrel and the players can't know anything about the story coming up. Why? Genesis dice system is so open anyway. Be open with the story. Let the players know what they're going to expect. Give them something to be excited for, and let them help you help them.
Hey, that adventure summary can be something you can tell your players as this is what we're going into. What happens is in the
that is your session 0 right there, your adventure summary.
Yep, absolutely.
The best way that I like to look at an adventure summary is the back of the video.
Yeah. That's it.
That's what if you were going to...
Or the back of the book.
Or the back of the book.
I was just totally imagining turning over a VHS.
See, I'm that old school.
So are we.
All right, VHS is totally in my time.
Oh, yeah.
Beta, actually.
Oh, Hey, I went and bought Laserdiscs. That's a side note. Anyway, side note altogether. So that is effectively the back of the book. That's your buy-in. That's if you were looking on IMDb and you were looking at a episode synopsis, that's what your episode summary is. Yep. So if you've got that, you can go and do it as an exercise. Go and jump on IMDb, find your favorite episode and see what the write-up is, and then break that down, and you will be able to do it. Break that down into your beats, and you'd be surprised.
I know when I very first started GMing way back when, I wish something like this existed, because going into GMing cold turkey, hardest thing in the world. Because I remember the first time I GM'd was a D20 Star Wars campaign, and I had a folder and an entire adventure written out, like every single element of the fight, every like a previous module essentially.
And you wouldn't have used half of it by the time.
I used a fair chunk of it, but I remember the work I put into it. Yeah, massive. And I'm like, I wish I had this level of knowledge back then.
Hey,
I think we all do.
I want to do what you just said. Find an episode online, use that as my adventure summary. Yep. And then run that adventure and see how different it is from the episode that I...
Yeah, definitely. I would recommend that. Just do it.
And if you're looking for, like, when we were talking about before about how to visualize and look at the ups and downs of the beat chart in terms of how it's set out with your cliffhangers and your developments, and talking about episodes, really good examples is like your really stock standard type of TV series that do have a clear beginning and end to them, like your Buffy the Vampire Slayers. Like I can just, when you're talking about this, it's very easy to see the beginning of the episode is your cliffhanger with whatever demon they're going to be fighting in that episode, with whatever object they find at the beginning is going to be using it. It is, and it's so clear through that. So if you are a Buffy the Vampire fan, which hopefully you are. No judgment. Just that's just fine. You've only just hurt my soul a little bit.
Well, I've never seen it.
And there is silence.
Sorry, I just need to count to 10 for my anger.
Hide, Michael.
I know. He's really not scared of me at all. But it's one of those things that's a really good way of seeing. Or even another really good example, as anyone watched, is Black Mirror. And Black Mirror on Netflix are individual, like the Twilight Zone.
Yep.
Individual stories that are designed to be told within 45 minutes to an hour. So they have very clear beats basically in the stories, because they have to be on point to tell that story.
They do a fantastic job of wrapping up a story in an hour and 10 minutes or whatever they go for.
Yeah.
They do such a good job.
It's one of those things that you also get, and this probably shouldn't turn into a review of Dark Mirror or Black Mirror, is that you do have that character development in that short period of time, and you actually care about these characters. Yes. So it's some great writing. Now, I think that that's something that some players or some GMs will think, how am I going to tell those sorts of stories? To be honest, I mean, that's an entire episode again about how to really get into the nitty-gritty of NPC design and of really formulating that story so that it's flawless. But ultimately, when it comes to a TV series or whether it comes to a book, the writer has been able to sit down and design that book by themselves, or design that script by themselves
for a while.
Exactly.
It's not done improvised on the spot.
Exactly right. So we're dealing with a whole different ballgame. So don't think that you're going to run a game exactly like a book or exactly like a comic or exactly like a TV series.
Well, they don't have players ruining your story.
No, that's right. But see, this is the whole thing, I think, when it comes to these, especially with Genesis, in my opinion, is that because of the existence of advantages and triumphs and despairs and threats, the players have so much more impact and so much more input into the story that the old style of GMing, where the GM is in control of something, control of the story, is just, it's out the door.
Yeah, but don't see your players as the enemy. They're not your adversary. They're part of your writing team.
Exactly right.
Perfect. Good point.
That is a perfect analogy, that they're your writing team. And I 100% agree with that.
And I think that is a hurdle a lot of GMs may still be experiencing, that whole old school GM versus player rivalry.
Yeah.
This is a storytelling game, not a competitive game.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think as well, we're also we're kind of forgetting a really important player that no one has control over. No, it's not you, Mike.
Oh.
It's the dice.
Yeah.
No one has control of how that dice is going to roll.
No.
You might have your resolution all set, ready, final shot. The villain is about to die or be shot and they roll a despair. That is going to completely change your story.
Yep.
And that is not through the fault of the player interpreting that dice. That is just how the dice rolls.
Yep.
So that is another thing to keep in mind, which is,
Yes.
yeah.
Don't be afraid that the dice alter the story.
Yes,
No.
100%. You fail, you make that failure part of that story.
Yeah, I mean, I ran a pre-written adventure that had it all set for the bad guy to get away at the end of it. Mm-hmm. Players, insta-gibbed him on the first round.
Yeah. Well, I think our Dragon Squadron was the perfect example of it. We all thought Vader was going to end us all, and
He
the
was
dice.
so close to doing it.
In comes Vixto with his ship. How many
Holy
triumphs
dooly.
was that?
Wow.
But that's it.
Not even mad. I'm super
Just-
proud of that.
Just roll with it. It develops story.
Yeah, my very first campaign that I ever ran with you guys, there was supposed to be an NPC that was going to die at the very beginning of it. Nope, she gets carted out of there alive and well, and now I had to figure out.
I thought that's what was going to happen. I thought that was the story.
Exactly. You thought that was going to happen. It wasn't what I had in mind, but the dice told a very different story, and so did the players. And so you roll with it. And now we have an NPC that I can throw back in whenever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So GMing does rely on a certain level of improv. There is no two ways about that. And that is something which is pretty intimidating, I think, for some GMs. I think that if you've got that ability, it's going to make your games so much better. And that's a learnt skill. It's not something that you automatically have.
No.
It is something that does require practice.
Yep.
So to bring it back to our topic in hand, write as much as you feel comfortable with within your own ability to be able to run that adventure
Yeah.
without turning it into a railroad. Because if there's one thing that the players don't like, it's a railroad.
And they know when they're on a railroad.
Oh, absolutely.
Or like you go and try and investigate someone and ask people different questions, yet you always get the same response. And you're like, well, what am I supposed to do if I'm going to be doing investigating and I can't talk to because I didn't talk to the person that you had designated in the corner of the room that you pointed out, but I didn't actually notice at the very beginning. So you instant lose your characters.
Perfect example. It doesn't have to be that guy to give
Right,
that answer.
exactly.
Move
Over
it.
there instead.
Yeah, move
Exactly.
the location.
It's got the whole you center on an event, not a person, not a place, not not a vehicle, not a vessel, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
don't tie it to something.
And you can also use that again to you can use that for locations 100%. As you're saying, you want the players to turn left, but they turn right. Make
was
the
always-
location that was going to be the left actually to the right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You're never going to know.
Or they choose to turn right, but they had a threat in there. So they did turn the wrong direction, and that was what the threat was, because you're allowing the dice to tell you what the story is.
Yep.
Or maybe they had to go right all along, but you had a despair or something like that. Allow the dice to do that.
Yeah, it brings them to the same place, but it's not a railroad because what you're doing is you're incorporating what the events at the table into bringing them to that point in the story.
Yep.
The events of how they get there, that's up to the players. They just ultimately end up at this beat.
Exactly. Very good. Okay, so the episode beat chart is going to be available for download on the Diceball Podcast website, which is www.thediceballpodcast.com. It will also be available on our Facebook page. And just as a side note, I'd like to thank Scott Zalmott for making our chart look amazing.
Big shout out.
Because originally it was just my rudimentary word processing skills to be able to put that sheet together. And I mean, it worked fine, but Scott's done an amazing job of
He's made it look great.
Making it look very Genesis-like. So thank you very much, Scott, for that.
We've mentioned before, but he was the man who did up the formatted and fancied up the GM Huzz's sci-fi armor.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he does some amazing work. So thank you very much, Scott, for that. your blood is worth bottling. That is for sure. And the other thing that we'll do is at some point is that we'll make that adventure available as a download as well. So we'll get that up sometime after this episode, so you can download that and sort of see how we've formatted that adventure. Also, don't forget that you can go to our notes section of the Dice Bell Podcast Facebook page, and you'll be able to find the entire article, which goes through the episode beat chart, how to use it, what all the different segments mean. And also, if you feel that you've done a really good job of using this chart yourself, send it to us. We'd love to see that in action and see how other people are using the tools we're creating.
Totally not going to steal your ideas.
Of course not.
Of course we're going to steal their
Promise,
ideas.
not promise.
Never do such a thing.
It's not as though the campaign police are going to turn up and say, I'm sorry, dude, that's not your idea.
One day they're going to show up and they'll surprise
are.
everyone.
Yeah.
Campaign police.
Yeah, oi,
You never
mate, not happening.
You never expect the campaign police.
Very good. All right, so I think it's that's pretty much covered that topic. If you do have any questions that you would like to us to cover or a show topic, let us know. We'd love to hear from you as well.
Always looking for suggestions. So fire them at us,
That's right.
if you will.
Now, I think we might have a couple of questions perhaps from somebody else.
We have one question.
One
And
question.
That's not cool. People need to send us more questions.
They do.
Hang on. Isn't there a segment for that?
Question time.
Question time?
Yeah.
No, I think it's behind the screens. And welcome to Behind the Screens, where we, the hosts of the show, will answer your games and rules questions regarding the Genesis role-playing game. And tonight, we have one amazing question. And I think we'll get GM Huz. Take it away.
We recently received an email from a dude called Dan. Now, he asks us you get a fairly lengthy email, so I've compressed it a little tiny bit. But he asks, does it seem a bit overkill to include separate skills for driving, piloting, operating, and riding? While I can understand the reason for breaking most of those into their own skill, operating seems like the odd man out, as its use seems very limited in most settings. Whew. Sorry, burped. If
You guys really like that part of that question.
If a vehicle is large enough to require a crew and would therefore not use the piloting skill, as the rulebook suggests, I would think that operating it requires giving commands to the crew and so would instead require a leadership check. I was doubly puzzled that the book suggests this skill should be used in all settings. I would happily use it if I could find a good reason, but I can't think of many settings where it seems very useful, especially with several other options for moving vehicles around. Now, that's a good question, Dan, and it kind of fits into what we've been doing recently, playing Sea of Thieves. Now, I fired Dan back an answer to this email already, but I thought it was a good question to ask, because if Dan's thinking it, most likely other people are thinking it too. Essentially, a vehicle doesn't have to be big and have a giant crew to use operating, because many more cumbersome vehicles should use operating, because it doesn't matter how good your reflexes are. If you turn that wheel, the ship's going to take its own time to turn. And a good example of that is old sailing ships, and that's something we've done a lot of in Sea of Thieves recently. You can be as quick as you like on that helm, but the ship's take turns at its own pace. So what it comes down to is your intelligence and how good and how able you are at best maneuvering that ship, because you need to know when exactly to steer, what direction, when to do it, when to counter turn, when to straighten out, etc. Following a compass. That all falls under.
And especially if you're dealing with a big ship that has a large crew,
that too.
You as the captain need to be plotting the course on the map, and then making sure that the instructions go to the right place on the ship at the right time.
Well, I think that's why Dan's suggesting using leadership.
Yes, but it's less leadership in that regard, because it's not just about guiding the crew; it's about making those adjustments.
The best way of guiding the crew,
exactly,
the most accurate way. So there's two levels of it. You can be a captain on a bridge, as you say, guiding the crew through operating, or also could be the helmsman of that Star Destroyer.
Absolutely.
Because that Star Destroyer ultimately needs a guy sitting in the driver's seat turning the Star Destroyer. His agility might be 25. But it doesn't matter. The Star Destroyer isn't. So that
Exactly,
Star Destroyer is
yeah.
going to be a very cumbersome ship to turn. So he can be quick as a whip. Doesn't matter. He needs to be intelligent enough to know how to use that Star Destroyer and how to best turn it. So I think, So I think that operating does definitely need to exist on its own because it doesn't cover all vehicles at all.
Exactly.
I know this skill was written for Genesis. Operating was written for Genesis because it doesn't exist in Star Wars at all.
Yeah, and I think they've seen that gap.
They have. And I think you could very well transplant this to Star Wars if you really, really wanted to. Ultimately, I don't think you have to. I think if you're in a Star Wars campaign already and you're flying a big ship, I would just use piloting and use intelligence instead of agility.
Well, that's,
If you really
yeah.
want to.
I think as well, it's important to look at what the character sheet is basing those talents against their characteristics. So your leadership checks are actually a presence. Now, you don't have to be an incredibly charming person to operate a ship, to get a
Exactly,
ship
correct.
going, to operate a mechanic, like a vehicle. You have to have a high intelligence. So there is a very big difference into how those skill checks are actually implemented into your checks, depending on what your character is trying to do.
Yeah.
If your character is trying to inspire your crew in order to work faster and better, that's your leadership check. If you're trying to get it most done, like without damaging the vehicle, if you're trying to maneuver lots of different things, if you're trying to interpret the way the machine or ship that you're operating or whatever it is that you're doing, then that would be your operating, which is that very different
Exactly.
level because you're
Exactly.
using a different characteristic.
I've made the suggestion to Dan via email saying, hey, you still could use leadership. You base
could.
your operating skill off, you can change it. You can tie that to you can base, a brain fart.
Your leadership.
Do you want to get the response up?
Yeah.
Where's your response?
That's right. We'll leave that out. It's fine. When I replied to Dan, I made the suggestion saying you could use leadership to boost operating skill checks. One PC could be the captain of the ship, and one PC could be the operator of the ship who's actually making the steering checks. So you could have the leadership check giving boosts, or this suggestion I made was allow the leadership PC to be the co-pilot. Instead of using piloting or operating to co-pilot, he uses his leadership ability.
Yeah.
You could even have even going backwards, you could have your operating check be your boost to the leadership because then people will go, "Ooh, this leader actually knows what he's talking about. He said he was going to get here by this time." It might have been the intelligence of the operator who actually made it happen, but because of the leader and his ability to do that, he's able to get a boost to his leadership checks in order to get the rest of the crew to follow his lead because he obviously knows what he's talking about.
Yep. Absolutely. And going back to what Dan said, where he's questioning if this should exist in all settings, I think it could exist in most settings, but it doesn't necessarily always have to be there. Because if you're playing in a Starfighter Aces campaign, we all flying little ships, you're probably never going to use operating. But if you're expecting players to use operating, tell them that operating might come up so they can put ranks into it. Because it could be a bit of a dead skill if you never intend your PCs to jump into big craft.
Because it can be sort of like if you were running a master and commander type setting.
Yes.
That you would definitely have operating as one of the more important
The
skills.
helmsman on
Because that's operating your big ships. Yep. So that's operating your ships of silhouette 5 or greater.
Well, no, you can't put a silhouette. I thought about that. You can't put a silhouette size on it because even a little smaller sailing ship is operating based.
A small sloop might still be operating because it requires that.
Multi-crew type thing.
No, you turn a helm on a small sloop. It doesn't matter how fast you turn that helm. The ship takes its time to turn. It's
The difference between a sailing ship and, say, a fighter jet is sort of what we're looking at.
They're chalk and cheese, absolutely.
But even if you're looking at not necessarily like the size of it, but also the type of ship you're looking at. I mean, we're talking a lot about, vehicles essentially and how you get there. But you could even look at the Peter Jackson film that's coming out very soon, where it's cities that devour smaller cities that happen to be moving cities. Like there's things like that happen. Or perhaps if you're looking at maybe not necessarily a vehicle that gets you from point A to B, but it's a vehicle that you step in like a mech. Like that could be a good use of operating versus
Absolutely.
using a piloting skill.
Sure.
You could be using operating in that. You could even be looking at, perhaps you're not even looking at sci-fi or, some of the technically advanced ones. You could be looking at, if you're doing a medieval theme and you're looking at operating the trebuchets that are going and attacking the Great Keep or the Trojan Horse. How are you going to get the Trojan Horse through there and all those different types of things?
Yeah, it's basically the difference between something that has one thing that you need to control, which is the yoke of the ship, or something that has so many different moving parts that you need to be looking after.
Yeah, so agile versus cumbersome, I think is the best way of sort of boiling it down. So in short, operating is very important. I think it has a place.
Yeah.
I think it's just got to make sense
does.
with the check and how that check is being applied by the player.
Good.
So have a look. If the player is wanting to do a leadership check in order to, inspire people to do things, go for it. But there is a very clear difference, and you can see that in how they're wanting to tell that story.
If you allow leadership to be the co-pilot to the operating check, because if you look at the co-piloting action in the vehicle rules, the co-pilot action makes the upcoming piloting or operating check easier. And that can be using leadership instead of piloting or operating as the co-pilot. That's a perfect representation of you, you giving the perfect commands to have your helmsman best steering the big ship.
I think as well, it's a little bit different when you think of, I know when I very first started, I couldn't quite tell the difference between, I could eventually after it got explained to me, but I'm like, wouldn't astrogation be the same as piloting? Because isn't piloting getting from point A to point B and astrogation is how you get from point A to point B? It's kind of similar in that respect where it's actually two different things that can be applied in two different ways and that you require two different kind of skill checks.
Yep. Ultimately, though, I think that it goes down to however you decide to set up your setting.
Yeah.
So if you find, if Dan, in this case, if he finds that he doesn't want to include the operator skill that he wants it under piloting, he doesn't have to include operating.
Absolutely.
It's entirely up to him. And I know the rule book says, according to what his question was, he says that operating can be used in all settings. Well, that might be true.
It's a recommendation.
It is. It's a recommendation.
But I think also Dan wasn't seeing the distinction of what operating was.
Yeah.
I think if he's thinking that, other players maybe also
Hell,
thinking
when we went into this, I had a little bit of a misunderstanding
that's
as
right,
well.
you weren't
So
sure about it either.
yeah,
And Dan replied to me via email and he said, hey, that's a good point. I'm going to leave it in my setting, but I don't see it coming up that often. Because he described his setting as a Mad Max meets the Warriors setting, which is amazing.
Yeah.
it's probably not going to come up.
Well, no,
mate.
he said that. And I said, well, I can imagine big giant land ships in your campaign.
Oh man,
And that would be used under operating.
Well, this is the thing. You can say when you're in your session 0, here's some of the things that I would probably recommend that you put an emphasis on based on the setting that you have. They can still be a part as your setting involved in the setting, as in skills that you tick and going, yes, this is a setting skill or things like that. And you can guide your players along that way. Like, hey, if you're going to be in a medieval setting, it's probably a good idea that you know how to ride a horse or something like that. And the other side of it is using the example of the trebuchet as well. You could have operating because there's lots of different people that need to operate and use the different triggers, but you could also have mechanics if you're using one of the smaller type of things as well. So there's different ways of using the skills depending on what's actually happening within the setting that you're using.
And as you said, it boils down to the campaign. It's going to tell a story to the players. Like if they're playing a master and commander, like Ian said before, chances are the players are going to need to know to invest in at least one of the players investing in operating to steer the ship. Otherwise, they're probably going to be in a bit of trouble.
Yeah.
Look, to take it to another, because you did mention all of the piloting type skills. If you look at a medieval setting, it may be that you just have the riding skill. But you could argue that, does it require riding skill to use a carriage?
Ooh.
Okay. So should you be including, if that's going to be what you do, so if you wanted to have a gladiatorial type thing with, a Ben-Hur type setting, you might decide to have piloting or call it something else that fits that category. That when using chariots, absolutely.
Well, I think driving is the perfect one for chariots.
Driving, exactly.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to just be. It's going to, at the end of the day, it's just going to be whatever you decide as the setting is the skills that you're going to use.
Yep.
Yeah.
And as long as those expectations, and we talked about expectations all the way through this entire podcast.
Yeah.
Is it's setting that expectation right from the start. You are going to know, and your players are going to know what skills are applicable to win.
So yes, Dan, thanks for the awesome question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, for the rest of you guys, keep the questions rolling because we want to hear from you guys and know what you guys want to know, want answered. I think
That's
it's fair
right.
to say.
Well, I think that everybody has had the book in their hot little hands for long enough now. And I know that Sam has gone through,
Yeah.
and we've had a whole heap of questions from Sam. We didn't want to sort of bamboozle you with all of the questions all at once, but
There wasn't enough time for all the questions.
No,
Yeah.
there wasn't.
No,
You
but
know.
we can try and bring some of those answers that we
Exactly.
can some of those questions that we can answer
Yeah,
in.
absolutely.
But also, I think that our listeners will have a few more questions once the Terranoth book hits.
Agreed.
Oh, yes.
Agreed.
And also, don't feel like the questions have to be, rules crunchy questions. Fine. Like, if you want to ask
Yeah.
us some random stuff, we'll be happy to answer it.
Whether it be to do with settings, whether it be to do with adventure design, or, hey, look, if your game is going terribly and you really want to get some advice how to bring it back on track, let us
That'd
know.
be fun. Yeah.
We'd certainly give some feedback in relation to that. Any questions. It doesn't matter how silly you might think it is. Chances are that somebody else has asked the same question. So that kind of brings us to the end of another great show, guys. Thank you very much for taking part. And hopefully our listeners have learnt something. And again, if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer in relation to adventure design, let us know.
Yeah, and make sure to subscribe and review us on whatever platform is bringing you our magical voices. It's a huge help for us and also helps spread the message out there. So subscribe, comment, review, sing. We want to hear what you think and also what you want to hear next.
I really hope we get some singing videos.
That'd be
sound
amazing.
clips. I'd love that. We could have it. We could have a feature.
We should actually ask for people who want to send us a soundbite.
Ooh.
That'd be kind of cool. Start of the episode. I know another podcast does that as well.
We'll never listen to them anyway, so it's okay.
No, exactly right. All right.
Perfection. Also, don't forget you can track us down on your social medias, Facebook and Twitter, by simply searching at Dice Pool Podcast. And of course, you can find us on our website, www.thedicepoolpodcast.com. And if you want us to send us an email, which we really encourage you to do, you can send us an email at info@thedicepoolpodcast.com. So get in touch. We want to hear from you.
All right. So that I think's a wrap. I'm GM Hooley,
I am GM Huz.
I'm GM Flano.
And I'm GM Caitlin.
and together we are the Dice Pool Podcast, where adventure is just a roll away. The Dice Pool Podcast is a proud member of the D20 Radio Network. For more information about the network, visit www.d20radio.com. The Dice Pool Podcast is a fan-generated podcast. All of the information provided on the podcast and related website are not affiliated with Fantasy Flight Games or any of their licensors. The content of this podcast remains the property of the Dice Pool Podcast and is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The Genesis role-playing game, the Genesis logo, content and all material remain the property of Fantasy Flight Games.
And we could either add this as you as the GM, could sort of step out of the beat chart if you wanted to, and add a little bit of a ticking clock to this entire situation. Because let's not forget the original idea of getting this MacGuffin that we established was they were selling it to off-world traders because this is how this world makes its money.
Yeah.
So...
That's going at the end of the...
That's hilarious.
Your face is even better. Oh my god! Look at my
But let's not forget that the whole purpose.
Still okay, Lynn.
Why do you have to tell me to stop? Don't tell me to stop because it makes it harder.
But if you stop, should it make it a little bit softer? Oh dear God.